So Rich, you emphasize that you begin with a good drawing. This is a desk credenza. Can you walk us through the drawing a little bit and show us what we're going to build?
Well, we have a mirrored image on both sides of the cabinets. There's a knee space in the middle for a desk sitting area. And the only difference in the carcass is the two inside panels where you sit are going to be sapelli veneer. The sapelli is the wood we're using for the face, obviously because it's meant to look like furniture. The rest of the carcasses will be melamine. I like to use melamine, and I'll explain why in another video when we're assembling a cabinet.
Well, in your book, 21st Century Modern Carpentry, you emphasize the importance of starting with a good drawing. You're able to get your material takeoff from this, your parts and so forth, but you begin your cabinet build with the face frame itself. Remind us why that's important.
Well, because in a face frame style cabinet, the face frame is the size of the cabinet, not the box or carcass of the cabinet. Only the face frame touches the wall, not the carcass of the cabinet. And one other thing I want to point out on the plans is this word right here. Verify. Always verify your measurements because they're most likely going to be different than the drawing.
All right. So tomorrow you start the process of milling the material, and then you'll get into cutting the parts, preparing the parts for assembly. So really excited to see what you're going to do. Until next time then.
Okay.
Rich, it looks like you're ready to begin the assembly of your face frames at last, but wait for it. There's a step that you want to take at this point.
Well, what I like to do with the floor of my cabinet is I like to biscuit it into the back of the face frame. Since it's a small cabinet, basically most of the load is in the dados of the side of the cabinet. Plus, this has a drawer in it, so there's no direct bearing on the floor of the cabinet. So what I'll do is make some marks for my biscuit joiner, and I'll put 2 biscuits in the face frame. And then what I'll do, when it's time to fit the bottom, I'll slide it into the dados and transfer my mark for the center of my biscuit to the front of the floor. And I'll make a slot in that to accept the biscuit, and there'll be a slot in the corresponding face frame. And when the bottom of the cabinet slides in, it'll align it in the face frame and it'll help support it. And what I'll do is I'll put a bead of glue in there and just either pocket screw or clamp it, and that's what'll support the bottom. In a larger cabinet, I would do a different application, like maybe a spline or a tongue and groove to support the floor of the cabinet. But in a small one like this, it's not necessary because it is a drawer that's in it, and there's not enough force on the bottom.
All right, so the essence of all of that complication is that the biscuit serves to help align the floor, and that's the main function of using the biscuit there, right?
Yeah, and just give it a little bit of support, that's all.
All right, well, show us how you set up to make the biscuits. You've got 4 cabinets that are this size. The opening is about 15 inches wide, and so you've collected those 4 bottom rails, and you're setting up
my 4 rails, and what I'll do is I'll gang them up, that's what we call it, and what that does, it helps support the tool as you're cutting your biscuit slot. So I laid out my measurements. I happen to be 5 inches into center from each side. I have my biscuit joiner set to the size biscuit. We happen to be using a number 10. And what I like to do is I like to check the thickness of my biscuit in millimeters, because some biscuit joiners have a different thickness biscuit than others. The higher end biscuit joiners, the biscuit is a little thicker than what you would get from Ryobi or DeWalt. So you got to just make sure you can get your biscuit in there where it's snug. And this one happens to fit nicely in the slot, so that's the one we're going to use. It's a number 10. It projects about a 1/2 inch out, so it's plenty of support. And what I do to cut them, I have my biscuit joiner set to a number 10. I have my depth, which is half the thickness of my floor, just to be in the center. And I just align it with my mark. Okay, so now I have the slot cut in that, and now when I take a sample of my bottom material, I make a slot in that. Now when I put my biscuit in and bring it down, it's flushed out just right.
Very nice. All right, it looks like you're ready to put it together.
Yeah, so what I do first is I like to use this Titebond 3. It's the strongest wood glue out there besides the polyurethane water cured stuff. And this is what's called an acid brush or a flux brush. So what I'll do is just put a little bit on, just spread it out.
And you don't worry about squaring this up at this point?
No, no. The cut, the butt cut should be square. So what I do, I like to pre-drill just a little bit on these end ones. It'll help keep it from splitting. Get any debris out.
And you drill that pretty slowly. You just want to snug it up, right?
Yeah. Make sure you cover the joint thoroughly. Don't worry about a little glue squeeze out because it's gonna be sanded. And you don't have to drill deep. I only go in just about 1/8 of an inch. For some reason it matters, I don't know why.
This kind of helps start your hole, huh?
Yeah. So now we're going to use spacers to get our drawer opening size.
I see. You're blocking out the opening. That assures that you're nice and even, square, etc.
You have a little bit of time. You got about 5 minutes with this glue once it makes contact before it starts setting up.
The Titebond 3 of the 1, 2, 3, we've learned that it actually has the longest setup time, right?
Yeah.
And it's the strongest and waterproof when it's fully cured.
Yeah, it's the best. It's the best glue to work with outside because it's waterproof and it's very strong. I don't usually pre-drill the interior rails because there's not much of a risk of splitting. make sure your slots are up, facing out and at the top of the piece.
That corresponds to the floor of the cabinet.
Yeah. You don't need those expensive silicone brushes. You really don't want to use your fingers, because then you got to keep wiping it on your pants like I do.
Where do you buy a flux brush? That's a plumber's tool typically, right?
Yeah, you get them at any plumbing supply will have big quantities of them, very cheap. Okay, so just check your work. Pocket screws on the inside, dados on the inside, 1/4" scribe out. And that's your rough face frame right there.
Very nice.
So now from here, it can be sanded immediately because the screws are acting as the clamps. And then after it's sanded, what I like to do is take a 1/16 round over bit and just ease all the sharp edges around the whole cabinet.
You'll show us that.
Yeah.
Nicely done, Rich. And this is face frame 6 of 6. Larger face frame, but the process is exactly the same.
Okay.
Your plans have told you that your opening on this cabinet is 21.5 inches, and you just cut 2 simple pieces of strips of plywood that were nice and flat. That's really all you need, huh?
Yeah, and then once it's clamped in place.
The blocking, by the time you get everything screwed together, these identical blocks that help you size the opening not only help you put it together here on your own, but helps ensure that your opening will be square.
Yeah.
That's a good size opening for a cabinet, isn't it?
You wouldn't want to go much more than that without having a center stile.
Hold that up for us and show us what it looks like.
That's the face.
So we've got our arced rail at the bottom. Very nice.
And then that's what the back should look like.
Okay. Got the dado to the outside that receives the side of the cabinet here a little further down the path. And the rails screwed into the stiles. Very nice. And let's take a peek at the drawing again. And by golly, looks just like the drawing. Well done, Chief.